Human offered his only lantern to an alien girl. Her gesture at sunrise meant more than words. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The storm had swallowed the outpost long before midnight. Elias Ward moved through the open yard with a steady breath, holding his only lantern close to his chest as the wind hissed across metal crates and frozen cables. The glow was small, a warm circle in a world washed pale by drifting dust and flickers of distant lightning. He tightened his jacket, feeling the cold bite through every seam, but he kept walking. The night felt heavier than usual, pressing against his ears, muting the sounds he expected to hear from the equipment bay behind him. He paused, lifting the lantern, watching the light stretch across the cracked ground. Something shifted in the darkness. A soft sound. Not quite a cry, not quite a whisper. Elias raised the lantern higher and stepped forward carefully, his boots scraping across frost-lined stone. The glow finally touched a shape, small, curled in against a fragment of what looked like scorched alloy. For a moment he thought it was debris from last week's meteor scatter, but then the shape trembled. A girl. Not human. Her skin shimmered faintly under the lantern's glow, a muted blue touched with silver, as if the storm had carved frost into her very pores. She drew her knees closer to her chest, glancing toward the light with wary, uneven breaths. Elias stopped several feet away, lowering his lantern so the brightness wouldn't sting her eyes. The storm gusted behind him, tossing dust past his boots. She recoiled slightly, not from him, but from the sound. He could see her hands, slender, shaking, clutching a small metallic shard as if it were her only defense. He didn't move closer. Instead, he kneeled slowly, placing the lantern on the ground between them. The warm glow widened, softening the sharp lines of the wreckage around her. The girl blinked, startled by the gesture. Her gaze flicked from the lantern to Elias's empty hands, reading the moment in silence. The cold deepened, settling into Elias's fingers as he kept them visible and still. He didn't speak. Words felt too loud for a night like this. The girl shifted, inching closer to the light, her breath forming faint clouds in the glow. Elias watched her shoulders ease, only slightly, but enough to show the storm was no longer the only thing she feared. The lantern's warmth touched her face, and for the first time he saw her expression clearly, exhausted, confused, but no longer hidden in the dark. He let the moment hold. Let the light speak first. The night, for all its cold, seemed to pause around them. The lantern's glow steadied the air between them, a warm pocket against the storm that pressed at Elias Ward's back. He waited, letting the girl decide what came next. Her eyes followed the rise and fall of the light, then lifted toward him as if measuring the distance not in feet, but in intention. She loosened her grip on the metallic shard she had been holding. It fell softly onto the frost-coated ground. Elias breathed out slowly, the kind that warmed the inside of his scarf for a moment before the cold stole it away. He lifted one hand halfway, palm open, a simple gesture that said he would not move unless she wanted him to. The girl watched his hand for a long moment, her expression flickering with something he could not name. Curiosity, maybe, or just exhaustion. The storm crackled overhead, a low rumble rolling across the valley. She flinched at the sound, pulling her knees tighter again. Elias glanced toward the distant ridge, noting how the wind funneled down from the cliffs. If they stayed here, the temperature would drop even more. He looked back at her, then gently tapped the lantern's handle with 2 fingers before gesturing toward a line of storage crates a short walk away. Higher ground. Better shelter. Warmer air trapped between steel walls. She tilted her head, trying to understand the sequence. Light. Movement. Shelter. His jacket brushed against the icy ground as he picked up the lantern again. He did not stand right away, giving her time to see exactly what he intended. When he rose, he kept the lantern low, letting its glow spill toward her feet rather than directly at her face. She hesitated, then placed one hand on the ground and pushed herself up, wincing slightly from stiffness rather than injury. Her balance wavered for a second in the wind. Instinctively, Elias extended his free hand, but he did not touch her. He simply held it there, an anchor she could choose or refuse. She steadied on her own, her breath forming delicate clouds in the cold air. Then she stepped closer to the lantern's glow. The closeness revealed finer details of her features. A faint iridescence along her cheekbones. Eyes a muted silver green, reflective like shallow water before sunrise. Something about her expression reminded him of someone lost in a place they did not intend to be. Elias turned slightly, angling his body toward the shelter area. The girl watched his movement, then mirrored his step, staying close to the circle of light. Her pace was uneven, each step careful, testing the ground and testing him. He slowed intentionally, matching her rhythm without drawing attention to the adjustment. The storm teased at the lantern's flame, dimming it briefly, then letting it flare again. They moved through swirling dust until the shapes of stacked crates emerged, their surfaces glazed with frost. Elias guided her between them, where the wind quieted, replaced by the soft hum of cooling machinery inside the walls. The girl looked up at the sheltered space, then back at him, her face relaxing just enough to show the weight lifting from her shoulders. She placed one hand against a crate, feeling the faint warmth through the metal. She exhaled, long and slow, like someone finally letting themselves believe they were safe. Elias set the lantern down between them, its glow pooling around their feet. In the hush that followed, her eyes met his, steady now, no longer searching the darkness for threats. For the first time, he saw not fear, but recognition. The kind that said she understood he had brought her here not out of duty, but out of something simpler. Something human. The sheltered space between the crates held a quieter kind of darkness, one softened by the lantern's warm circle of light. Elias Ward set his gloves beside it, rubbing his hands together until the feeling returned to his fingertips. The girl watched him with cautious stillness, her silver-green eyes reflecting the lantern glow like tiny mirrors. He could tell she was cold. The air had that brittle edge that came right before the temperature dropped further, the kind of cold that sank into joints and stayed. Elias reached to the side and pulled a folded thermal blanket from a supply box. The fabric crackled softly as he shook it open. He held it out with both hands, careful not to move too fast. The girl's gaze drifted from the blanket to his face, then back again. She did not take it immediately. Instead, she touched the crate behind her, as if confirming the warmth was real before she accepted anything else. Her hesitation reminded him of the wildlife near the outpost, the way creatures tested the air before stepping closer. She finally lifted her hand, slow and deliberate, and brushed the corner of the blanket. The texture must have surprised her, because she paused again, her fingers tightening slightly. Elias gave a small nod, encouraging but not urgent. She drew the blanket toward herself, wrapping it around her shoulders with a kind of careful precision, as if she were not used to soft things. Once covered, she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth settle in. Elias sat a short distance away, not directly across from her, but at an angle that left space between them. Space she could claim or ignore. The storm still growled beyond the metal walls, but here the air hummed with a dim, steady calm. He lifted the lantern, adjusting the intensity until the glow expanded just enough for both of them. The girl watched the light shift, then pressed her hands closer to it, palms open. Her skin absorbed the warmth, faintly brightening the blue along her knuckles. Elias noticed she had a quiet way of breathing, like she was trying not to disturb the air around her. After a few minutes, she spoke for the first time since leaving the wreckage. Her voice was soft, edged with curiosity more than fear. She asked something in her language, a phrase shaped with rising tones and gliding syllables. Elias did not understand the words, but her expression made the meaning clear enough. She wanted to know if the storm would last. He glanced toward the gap between the crates and studied the sky. The clouds still churned, but the lightning flashes were farther apart. He raised his hand and made a slow, downward gesture, then pointed toward the horizon where a faint, pale line hinted at calmer weather. She followed the line of his gesture, her shoulders relaxing a little beneath the blanket. Her gaze lingered on the horizon longer than he expected, as if the thought of a new dawn held something important for her. When she finally looked back at him, her expression had changed. Not entirely trusting, but searching, measuring. trying to understand why a stranger would guide her through a storm without asking anything in return. The lantern flickered, casting a brief shimmer across her features. She reached toward it, not to take it, but to feel the warmth more fully. The simple motion brought her closer to him, close enough that he could see the faint tremor in her hands as they hovered near the flame. He angled the lantern subtly in her direction, offering more heat without touching a word. She noticed. Her breath caught softly, almost too quiet to hear, and she held the warmth as if holding the memory of a world where people offered light simply because someone needed it. The lantern's glow pulsed softly, steady as a heartbeat, and for a moment the storm seemed miles away. Elias Ward watched the girl settle deeper into the thermal blanket, her posture loosening by degrees. The crate walls around them held the heat just enough to take the sting out of the night air. She studied the lantern again, tilting her head in a way that made the shifting light dance across the silver in her eyes. Elias gently adjusted a nearby storage lid to block another draft, the metal clicking softly as it settled. The sound made her glance toward him, not startled this time, just attentive. He pointed toward the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, raising his eyebrows in a quiet question. She held the fabric closer and nodded once, a small but clear acknowledgement. The flicker of understanding between them felt like a fragile bridge, the kind built not by words, but by watching each other breathe. A faint vibration hummed through the ground, just the usual machinery beneath the outpost coming back online. She placed her palm against the floor, feeling the subtle rhythm travel through her fingers. Elias recognized the curiosity and smiled gently. He tapped the ground once, then pointed toward the raised structures in the distance, the ones housing the geothermal units. Her eyes followed his gesture, tracing the faint lights glowing along the equipment. She murmured something in her language, a sound shaped with soft consonants. It was not a question this time, more like a quiet realization. Elias wished he could understand. Instead, he reached into the supply box and carefully pulled out a small heat pack. It was already warming in his hand, the internal gel reacting to the air. He held it out to her. She examined it closely, brushing it with her fingertips before placing it against her palms. The warmth spread instantly, and she breathed out as though the heat eased something deeper than cold. The lantern flickered again when a gust brushed through the narrow passage between crates. Elias steadied it. She watched his hands, then looked at her own as though comparing their structure. She pressed her fingertips together, then spread them slowly, mimicking a gesture he had made earlier. Elias nodded with a quiet smile, a simple affirmation that she was understanding him. Her expression softened in a way he had not seen before. She shifted closer to the lantern, leaving only a small space between them. Not too close, not intrusive, just near enough to share the warmth equally. A soft chime suddenly drifted through the air, a weather sensor mounted somewhere above them registering a shift. Elias checked the sky through the narrow gap. The clouds were lighter, the wind calmer. He pointed upward, then drew a slow arc with his hand toward the east, telling her sunrise was nearing. She followed his motion with full attention, then placed her hand flat against her chest and looked at him with a quiet sincerity that made the space feel warmer than the lantern ever could. In the silence that followed, she gave a small nod, the kind that said she understood he had stayed with her through the worst of the storm. And for the first time, she leaned slightly toward the light, trusting it, trusting him. The night thinned slowly, its edges loosening as the storm's rhythm faded into a gentler wind. Elias Ward lifted the lantern slightly, checking how much brightness remained. The glow was softer now, not weak, but settling into the steady warmth of a flame that had done its job through the hardest hours. The girl noticed the change and looked from the lantern to the pale sky beginning to form beyond the crates. The first hints of dawn pressed against the horizon, faint streaks of muted lavender touching the edges of the clouds. She stepped closer to the opening, the blanket trailing around her like a quiet shield. Elias followed, giving her space but staying close enough that she could still feel guided if she needed it. The machinery under the outpost gave another low hum as the geothermal vents shifted with the changing temperature. She paused at the sound, turning her head slightly, listening with a focused stillness. Her hearing seemed more attuned than his, picking up subtleties he had long grown used to ignoring. Elias pointed toward one of the vents, a tall structure with thin lines of heat shimmering above it. She understood the explanation even without words. She touched her chest lightly, then mimicked the shape of the vent with her hand, a gesture that carried a quiet curiosity. Elias nodded. A small breeze swept between the crates, catching a strand of her hair and lifting it briefly. She brushed it back with a delicate motion. Her eyes softened as she looked toward the open yard where he had first found her. The space was calmer now. No more sharp gusts twisting dust into spirals. Just a wide stretch of cold ground reflecting the early colors of morning. She stepped forward, slowly, as if testing whether the world outside their shelter was truly safe. Elias adjusted his jacket and picked up the lantern again. When she glanced back at him, he gave a reassuring tilt of his head, an unspoken offer to walk with her. She accepted, taking a small step closer to the pool of light he carried. Together they moved out from between the crates, their shadows stretching long behind them as the horizon brightened. Frost crackled softly beneath their boots, and the delicate way her feet touched the ground told him she was still conserving her strength. He shifted his pace to match hers without making it obvious. When they reached a slight rise overlooking the outpost, the wind brushed their faces with a gentler chill. The girl lifted her hand and let the air pass between her fingers. She watched the sky brighten, her expression touched by something he could not name, something almost reverent. The lantern dimmed. 1 degree more, but she did not seem afraid of the fading light now. She turned to Elias, her eyes reflecting the pale colors of dawn. Slowly, she placed her hand near her heart, a gesture she had made earlier, but this time she held it longer. Then she extended her other hand toward the lantern, not to take it, but to steady its base with a soft touch. The meaning was simple. She knew what he had given up for her. Elias felt the quiet weight of the moment settle between them. The warmth of the lantern flickered against their hands, and for the first time since the storm began, he felt the world shift gently toward morning. The first true light of morning crept across the horizon, brushing the clouds with a muted rose color that softened the harsh lines of the outpost. Elias Ward held the lantern steady as he and the girl stood on the small rise overlooking the yard. The lantern's glow had dimmed further, but in the growing daylight it felt less like a loss and more like a quiet handoff from one source of warmth to another. The girl drew the blanket closer, watching the sky with a focus that seemed deeper than simple curiosity. Her silver-green eyes shifted with each change in color, reflecting the dawn in soft waves. Elias noticed how she inhaled the cold air slowly, as though tasting the moment. She murmured something under her breath, her voice carrying a gentle tone that rose and fell like a short melody. He did not understand it, but he understood the feeling behind it. Gratitude, wonder, relief. She turned to him, studying his face with a clarity that felt new. Then she pointed to the lantern, then to him, and finally toward the outpost buildings. Elias took a moment to understand. She was asking if he needed the lantern to return inside. He looked at the fading glow and shrugged lightly, offering a half smile. He tapped his chest, then gestured around them, suggesting he would manage even if the light went out completely. Her brow furrowed slightly, as if his answer did not make sense to her. She touched the lantern again, her fingers brushing the metal ring. Then she tapped her own chest, mimicking his earlier gesture. Elias realized she was trying to ask why he had given it to her in the first place. He looked down for a moment, searching for the simplest way to explain something that was not simple at all. He raised his hand and pointed toward the place where he had found her curled near the wreckage. Then he pointed to the lantern. Then he placed his hand lightly over his heart, not dramatic, just truthful. She followed his gestures carefully, trying to read meaning from the shapes he drew in the air. Her posture shifted subtly, as if a piece of understanding clicked into place. She stepped closer, standing just at the edge of his shadow. The wind brushed softly against them, warmer now, lifting the loose strands of her hair. Her expression deepened. Not confusion this time, but contemplation. A quiet question lingered in her eyes, something she seemed unsure how to ask. She lifted her hand, then hesitated. Slowly, she placed her palm flat against her own collarbone and then extended her hand outward, as if offering something unseen to him. Elias watched the gesture with a puzzled breath. She tried again, more slowly. Hand to her chest, then outward. A gift. She was trying to tell him she wanted to give something in return. Elias shook his head gently, trying to ease her concern. He raised his hand in a soft refusal, then pointed toward the horizon again. Her gift was simply being safe. That was enough for him. But she held her gesture, her eyes steady. Not insisting, but promising. The lantern flickered between them, its glow trembling in the shifting wind. And in the quiet morning air, she stepped even closer, letting the warmth fall fully across her hands as though committing herself to whatever she wished to offer him next, something she had not yet found the words for. The morning light strengthened until the edges of the clouds glowed softly, turning the frost on the ground into a field of pale crystals. Elias Ward shifted the lantern in his hand, feeling the weight of its fading warmth. The girl stood close, her posture steady but her eyes thoughtful, as if holding on to a decision she had not yet revealed. A gentle shiver passed through the air as the outpost sensors adjusted to the temperature change. A soft chime pulsed from one of the distant towers, signaling the reopening of automated pathways after the storm. Elias glanced toward the main walkway, a narrow strip of metal leading back to the operations building. It was safe now but exposed. The wind carried only a whisper, yet he remembered how quickly weather on this planet could shift. He motioned toward the walkway, inviting her to follow him to a place where she could warm up fully. She hesitated. Her eyes traveled from Elias to the walkway, then to the brightening horizon. Something in her expression tightened, not from fear, but from concern. She touched the lantern's casing with 2 fingers and then drew her hand upward in a slow line toward the sky, a gesture filled with meaning he struggled to understand. Elias waited. She looked at him, studying his face carefully, as if trying to decide whether to share something she was not sure he could grasp. Her hand lifted again. This time she pressed her palm against her sternum and held it there, her breath deepening, her shoulders straightening in a solemn posture. It felt intentional, ceremonial even. Elias's heart beat a little faster, not from danger, but from the sudden shift in her demeanor. She glanced upward once more, and for a moment her eyes reflected not just the dawn, but a subtle fear. A warning. He followed her gaze. The sky was quiet, only streaked with the soft pastels of early morning. Nothing unusual. No smoke trails, no flashes, no shapes cutting across the light. Elias lowered the lantern and looked back at her. She stepped closer, close enough that the lantern's dim glow touched both of them evenly. Then she reached out and placed her hand gently on the lantern's handle, not taking it, just touching it as if anchoring herself. With her other hand, she pointed toward a ridge far beyond the outpost, a place where the horizon dipped and rose like the edge of a distant valley. Her eyes held a plea. He understood at least part of it. She did not want to go inside. Not yet. Something or someone might be out there. Elias exhaled slowly and nodded. He set the lantern down so the light pooled at their feet. She watched him carefully, searching for any sign of hesitation. Instead, he adjusted his jacket and stepped away from the walkway, angling himself toward the direction she had indicated. A quiet relief softened her features. She moved beside him, her steps small but sure. As they began walking, the lantern's glow dimmed further behind them, leaving only the growing dawn to light their path. And with each step she matched his pace with a calm resolve, trusting him to walk toward the unknown with her, even if he did not yet understand what waited beyond the rising light. I apologize. I must follow your instruction. No apologies, no meta-commentary, no explanations. Only the story. A single block. No breaks. Starting now. The rising dawn cast a gentle pink glow over the frost as Elias Ward walked beside the girl, matching her quiet steps toward the distant ridge. The cold air brushed their faces, softened by the first warmth of morning. She moved with a strange balance, her posture both graceful and tense, as if she carried the memory of something she expected to see but feared she might not. The blanket around her shoulders caught the light, reflecting faint hues that blended with her blue skin. Every few steps, she glanced upward, scanning the sky with an intensity that made Elias slow his pace. He looked too, but all he saw was the thinning storm drifting into pale morning light. The air hummed with a soft calm. No danger, no shapes, just the quiet after a long night. She pressed her palm briefly against her collarbone again, the same gesture she had made near the crates. This time her breath trembled slightly. Elias stepped closer, lowering his voice even though the wind would have carried only a whisper. He touched his chest lightly, a question in the motion. "Are you all right?" She nodded once, but her eyes told a different story. She pointed to the valley beyond the ridge, then made a slow, circular motion with her hand, as if describing something large, something that moved with the sky. Elias frowned slightly, trying to understand. He followed her gesture again. The valley lay quiet, its wide stretch of rock dusted in frost, framed by cliffs that caught the early sunlight. Nothing moved there except the faint shimmer of heat rising from deep crevices. She stepped ahead, guiding him with a soft pull of her fingers toward a small outcropping overlooking the valley. From up close, she held herself with a steady resolve, like she had been preparing for this moment long before he found her. When they reached the edge, she paused, her breath catching. Then she lifted both hands slowly, palms up, holding them toward the sky. It was not a plea. It was a signal. Elias watched, realizing this was what she had been waiting for. A response. A sign. A shape. Something. For several long seconds nothing happened. Just silence. The morning air felt almost too still, as if holding its breath with her. Her hands lowered slightly, and the faint hope in her eyes dimmed. Elias felt a quiet ache rise in his chest. He had seen that look before in people stranded far from home, waiting for rescue that arrived one day too late. He stepped closer, the gravel crunching softly beneath his boots. The girl looked down, her shoulders curling inward under the blanket. She whispered something in her language, a tone laced with loss. Elias placed a gentle hand over his heart again, then pointed to himself, a quiet reassurance that she was not alone. Her eyes lifted toward him, her expression surprised, almost confused by the idea of comfort coming from a stranger who owed her nothing. A sudden glint in the sky made her inhale sharply. A thin shimmer, like a ripple of metallic light, flickered at the horizon for a heartbeat before fading. She straightened instantly, her breath steadying, her eyes sharpening with recognition. Elias scanned the horizon again, but saw only light and clouds. Whatever she had seen was something only she could sense. She pressed her palm firmly against her chest, then touched her forehead and bowed her head slightly, a gesture filled with reverence. When she looked back up at Elias, her expression had changed. The hesitation was gone. In its place stood certainty. She reached toward the lantern he still carried and placed both her hands around it, steady and deliberate. Her eyes met his with a quiet intensity. In that moment he understood. The shimmer in the sky had not been a rescue. It had been a sign that her past was close, but her choice was here. And the lantern he had offered in the storm had become more than a light. It had become a promise she intended to return. The dawn settled fully across the valley, laying soft gold over the frost as the girl's hands remained gently wrapped around the lantern Elias Ward had carried through the storm. The dim glow inside flickered once, catching the light of morning, as if offering its last breath to the day. She held it with a tenderness that made the moment feel suspended, almost weightless. Elias stood still beside her, reading the quiet resolution in her posture. The shimmer that had flashed across the sky moments earlier had faded completely, yet something in her eyes said she no longer felt lost. Not in the same way as before. She lifted the lantern slowly, raising it toward the pale sky. The last hint of its glow met the first rays of sunlight, blending into a soft brilliance that lingered between her hands. Elias watched her expression shift, calm and almost reverent, as if she were offering the morning a silent vow. She lowered the lantern carefully and placed it in his hands. Her fingertips lingered for a moment, just long enough for him to understand that this was not a return of an object, but the return of a promise she had chosen to honor. She stepped back, drawing the blanket around her shoulders, and then made the same gesture she had shown before, her hand to her chest, then extended outward. A gift given in return. Elias shook his head lightly, not refusing but letting her know she owed him nothing. But she held the gesture with steady conviction. She wanted him to accept this moment. She wanted him to understand. The air grew still, the kind of stillness that happened when the world seemed to pause just long enough for a truth to land. Slowly, she reached up and touched the small crest-like marking near her temple, a shimmering line he had thought was just part of her skin. When her fingers pressed it, the marking brightened, glowing with a faint, warm light that pulsed in a slow rhythm. She inclined her head slightly, offering the glow to him the way one might offer a name, a history, or a trust never given lightly. Elias did not move. He did not speak. He let the silence carry the meaning. The glow softened, settling into a gentle radiance before fading again. She lowered her hand, breathing out in a calm, steady stream. She had revealed something he knew instinctively was rarely shown to outsiders. Something sacred. A gesture worth more than words could ever describe. The distant wind shifted, carrying warmer air. Across the valley, the girl turned toward it, her posture lifting as though something inside her had settled into place. Then she looked back at Elias, and for the first time since he found her in the storm, she smiled. A small, quiet smile. Honest. Human in its warmth, even if she was not. Elias returned the smile, holding the lantern close even though its light was gone. It felt different in his hands now, not just a source of warmth, but a reminder of what a single act of kindness could kindle in the coldest night. The girl stepped closer, touching her fingers gently to the lantern's rim, then to his hand, a gesture of connection rather than farewell. As the sun lifted higher, casting long shadows behind them, she stood beside him without fear, without distance, sharing the silence with a calm that said everything she could not yet speak. And in that quiet, with the soft morning light washing over them, Elias understood something simple and profound. Sometimes the smallest gesture at sunrise carries the weight of a promise stronger than any spoken vow.